What's your favorite political ad of all time? Mine is probably AOC taking off her flats to put on heels on the subway in New York.
Sort of random, but there was one in '06
Mhm.
that we all laughed about at the time, where this candidate for Congress in Buffalo said, Tom Reynolds is selling your jobs out to China. And then there was a huge gong sound. And it was widely seen as totally absurd at the time. And then the guy almost won, which was very surprising. And now it's basically all of American politics.
Oh my gosh, I did not clock that ad.
You may not have been in Buffalo in 2006.
Thankfully not.
Are there any, like, when you were a kid? I'm trying to remember if there's formative ones when I was a kid.
I wasn't in the States when I was a kid. There were no ads for Suharto in Indonesia. He just kept being president.
He didn't have to advertise. That's
that.
a great product. It doesn't even, it's like Tesla. It doesn't advertise.
According to some, it might be the future of America, too.
Suharto sells itself. One-party rule sells itself. I'm Ben Smith.
I'm Nayeema Reza.
And this is Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media.
So the election is around the corner, literally. We're days away. There is so much noise out there, media endorsements or non-endorsements, as the case may be. And all this noise, the question for us today is there any signal out there? Is there anything to learn days before an election? Is there, Ben?
No way. We're just inside a noise machine. But what we see in our media bubble is really very different from what voters in the swing states are seeing, which is largely paid advertising. The campaigns have raised billions of dollars. You may have gotten some texts and emails asking for it, and they are just giving every last penny of it to digital platforms and to the operators of local affiliates in Pennsylvania to show them a relatively small number of political ads that don't always look exactly like what we're hearing, in the news cycle and on social media.
Right. What sells in New York City might not sell in the contested district of Georgia that they're looking at. So today we're going to find out what there is to learn this close to an election. And to chat about all that, we have two great Semaphore reporters who've been at the center of these stories, covering them. David Weigel, who has decades of experience, I think, covering politics, political campaigns, and political advertising. He is a nerd on all those zip codes. And then Max Tani, a media editor who gets the scoopiest scoops, including this week around Washington Post's non-endorsement, a story, Ben, you have become obsessed with.
Honestly, one of the things about the end of a presidential campaign is all the narratives fall apart. It's just the big campaign is just people insulting each other and arguing about nonsense. And the Washington Post story has given journalists something to hold on to. So we do appreciate that.
I think everyone's just absolutely mad at the 11th hour and grasping for straws and anyone they can blame. And Jeff Bezos, hey, he looks like a guy people can blame. I just am wondering
he just
who was waiting
it.
for the Washington Post endorsement to make their decision for November 5th.
That's the most amazing part. It was like everyone is just losing their minds, and particularly, progressives on social media are losing their minds.
Yes.
Free-floating anger, looking for somebody to hate, and Jeff Bezos just kind of walks right into it and sticks up his hand.
All right, we're going to dig into all of that after the break. All right, let's dive into this episode, which is all about what you're not seeing, what actually shapes the race days before an election. And a lot of that actually happens in swing states. So we're going to do this episode in two parts. First, we're going to bring on journalist Dave Weigel to talk about the mammoth multi-billion-dollar industry that surrounds elections. And this, of course, is advertising. We're going to talk about what voters in swing states are seeing, how that differs from what candidates are saying at rallies or at interviews, if at all, and whether any of it matters, whether anyone really hasn't made up their mind. And then we'll turn to the smaller media business that surrounds these elections, and that's journalism, of course, the business we're in. And we'll talk about what we're not seeing here, which is these non-endorsements from the Washington Post, the LA Times, and elsewhere, thanks in part to the billionaire class. For that, we're going to bring in Max Tani, who is not part of the billionaire class, but has been covering the story. But first up, Dave Weigel and political ads. So Ben, explain who Dave is.
So Dave and I came up together in the early 2000s when the trend among journalists had been that you wandered around America talking to people and came back to Washington and said, here's what they think in the heartland. And it was changing to a world in which people looked at tweets, read blogs, wrote blogs, and looked at polls and data and sneered at the old timers who, talked to people in diners. And all the rest of us went and read tweets and wrote tweets and read polls. And Dave has spent the last 20 years wandering around America for hundreds of days a year,
Wandering is such a good description for how Dave moves through this world.
Yes, and who has a sort of unmatched at this point and totally unique feel for how politics is playing out on the county commissions, school boards, state assembly level in 50 states, and then how national campaigns try to reach into that. And so he's a really totally unique journalistic voice at this point. And it's very hard to catch up with Dave because he's, for 20 years, been on the road traveling the country.
Wandering, trying to learn something. So you're saying that as you guys came up, you became the person to blame, the Twitterati, and he became the person who was going out trying to find truth in the middle of the country. The division that we've had in this country, Dave Weigel is the person trying to solve that.
Yeah, I mean, people of my generation made fun of a guy named David Broder, who was the legendary Washington Post journalist of the previous generation. And I think of Dave as kind of actually heir to that tradition, which is coming back in fashion as the polls, as we realize how little the polls are really telling us.
Everybody wants to know. I was just in Michigan, and all I did was go to dollar stores and talk to voters.
Were they alarmed?
That's my reporting hack. I go to a dollar store. No, by the way, the thing with the people at the dollar store is that they have all the time in the world, and they have they're persnickety. They have grievances that they'd like to tell you about. So I find it's a great place to go do reporting. Don't you think? Where do you go?
Yeah, I guess they're very understaffed. So there's nobody to come up and tell you to stop bothering their customers.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Hi, Dave. What should our icebreaker be for you?
This is the question. The icebreaker question I keep getting in DC is, why are you here? Whenever I'm not in a swing state, people ask why you're here, which I guess is flattering. And the answer is, I was just traveling for a month, and also the final. We're definitely in garbage time right now, and you can tell just reporting on the ground. You're getting some interesting voter voices, but the campaign messaging and strategy is on autopilot almost. So good time to be here.
Yes, because Ben was just describing you as this person who wanders through middle America as opposed to just sitting in a city tweeting like a lot of political reporters might do.
Yeah, I tweet from middle America too, but the tweets have more gravitas when they're in D.C.
Where were you last, by the way?
I was last in Philadelphia, but before that was Wisconsin and Arizona and Texas, because I tried to at least touch base and see, okay, am I missing something? I guess the takeaway I've had, and my friends who are out the trail right now, is, yeah, it's pretty close. You're not seeing anything that says it's broken in one direction or one campaign is collapsing or surging. It's been close, so good to confirm.
When you touch back down to a DC or New York or wherever you might end up, do you just feel like we are so out of touch?
In some respects, it depends who you're talking to in DC and New York, because the main issues of the election, I think, are actually fairly universal. There are people who are annoyed with the surging price of their $400,000 house in Michigan, and there are people annoyed with the surging price of their $1 million condo in Brooklyn. That's pretty common. Every election is a bit more national, but yeah, when it comes to people being plugged in to politics, I do find a gap between those who are watching sporting events on TV and seeing ads every night in a swing state and people who are online and responding to what they see as the message of the day online. There has been this manipulation of everything's manipulation when campaigns are talking to media, but a manipulation of what the story of the day is that often is not connected to what I could see people talking about in a swing state.
So which is the real campaign? Is it what people like us are talking about, on Twitter, on Morning Joe, or is it just literally what's being advertised on television?
I think it's more the latter. I'm a paid media determinist. If you are willing to spend money on something, you believe it. So, for example, I wrote at the beginning of October, really, about how many ads the Trump campaign was running on transgender issues. And that day, I remember the Times and somebody else wrote the same story. We were all clearly working at the same time. But all of us, it felt, were weirdly early to it, because the discourse in D.C. and on cable was not about that. It was about other stuff that was happening. And I do think there are events that candidates create, the campaigns create, things they say that really mean a lot to people discussing politics, but not out there. And so Trump is not giving fresh interviews and saying, I'm going to run ads about boys and girls sports, quote unquote. But that was what the campaign was doing. And
Right.
the Harris campaign also it has to go back and forth on a bunch of different, what's your response to Biden's gaffe? What is your response to this Trump rally? It gets those questions from the press, but its advertising has all been, Kamala has an economic plan, Trump's going to give tax cuts to the rich. So honestly, if you're a reporter talking to the campaigns and the PACs, you are getting that. If you're watching the discourse between people trying to shape opinion, you're not getting that.
So what you're describing, Dave, is kind of like candidates are putting money where their mouth isn't, or at least where it isn't always. They might be saying one thing in their rallies and their closing arguments, but they are actually advertising and putting a lot of money behind quite another in these swing states because they think that's going to move the needle. And maybe it's a good time for us to actually listen to some of these ads, starting with Donald Trump's. So the ad that you're talking about, which is, I think, one of the most popular ads that's running in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona, and Michigan, and I think Nevada right now, is this trans ad, Insane.
That's the official title of it, Insane.
He murdered a father of 3, sentenced to life in prison. Kamala Harris pushed to use tax dollars to pay for his sex change.
I made sure that they changed the policy so that every transgender inmate would have access.
It sounds insane because it is insane. Kamala was the first to help pay for a prisoner's sex change.
The power that I had, I used it in a way that was about pushing for the movement, frankly, and the agenda.
Kamala's agenda is they, them, not you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
They, them, not you.
Dave, what's going on there? Like, what is that about? Like, it's not, I don't think it's really about that most people, if you poll them or ask them, think transgender inmate surgery is like a top issue in their lives. So what is going on there?
Well, one through line of this campaign, I kind of colloquially will call it the Don Jr. campaign, because it is much more focused on issues they think are breaking through that don't get discussed in the mainstream media, mostly by young men. The campaign's not all about young men, but they believe that there are issues that people will be offended by and change their vote on, even if they don't want to necessarily talk about them. And this is one of them. It's a, hey, we need to save civilization from this gender agenda, and we also need to save men from feminism.
Is they write that ad? Is that focus grouped and market researched and, treated in the way commercial advertising and a lot of campaign advertising is? Sort of very sophisticated research is done before anything goes on air? Or is the Trump campaign going with its gut on this?
No, it's more the first one. And the gut part of it, though, is that Trump has done this for 9 years as a candidate, of saying things that are going to generate negative coverage on media outlets he doesn't care about. He is a master of getting attention and changing the conversation to what he wants to change it to. And so this is tested.
This is a bit of like dog whistling, right? I mean, he's putting out this message. And then Kamala Harris comes on and tries to correct this in the Brett Baier interview. She was asked about it, and she points out that Donald Trump himself, during his administration, had to allow these transgender surgeries in prison because that was the letter of the law, and he too had to follow them. So does something like that, of the Brett Baier interview, actually correct or address the fears that are inspired by an ad like the Insane ad?
Does it address it for who? Sorry. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, I'm asking, like, does it actually reach the same people? Or are there just two different worlds out there? Some people are watching these interviews, paying attention to the rallies, and totally untethered to what you're calling the sports audience who's seeing the political ads.
That's an interesting way to ask it. If you back up further, 6 months ago, the Trump campaign was talking a lot more about the economy, about inflation, about gas prices. And if you notice, those have become less advantageous issues for Trump. So they're very good. And the Republican Party, as something with a full-time conservative media wing that pushes storylines, is very good at changing the topic. And so this did change to something that is not a top issue for most people, will not affect them. We're talking in that ad literally about one prisoner in California in the year 2017 who got this operation. The Democratic theory here is, they keep throwing stuff up about wedge issues because they want to grab somebody's attention, make them think Harris is a crazy liberal, and this is a better thing to grab onto because this sophisticated part, they know that she can't say, actually, I don't support that anymore. Actually, I'm going to throw trans people under the bus right now. That's the sort of top level you can talk about a dinner party strategy. The gut strategy is just, we think if people keep hearing this, they're going to say, gross, I don't want that, and not vote for her.
It's not really about the trans issue. It's actually hinting at something that young parents are feeling about gender identity in schools, around sports, around the cultural conversation about gender. That ad is about a trans surgery, but what they're trying to inspire fear about is something about people's children.
Yes, it is that. I don't know how online everyone listening to this is. Hopefully, very.
Hopefully not very. Turn it off.
What's been very helpful for me is I'm on YouTube a lot for work and for entertainment. I watch a lot of conservative stuff on YouTube, and I'm served just endless content, debates, chat shows, interviews. I think once a day I can see the same gender critical person being interviewed by a different podcaster. It's kind of endless. And who is staffing Republican politics at this point? Well, at the top level, there's a Chris Lizaveta. There are those veterans. But you saw this in the Republican primary. Younger Republican activists, they don't watch CNN. They take pride in that. They don't read the New York Times. They take pride in that too. They're very online, and everyone they know is talking about this stuff. So it feeds into that, and they've convinced themselves that if everyone could just hear this message, they will move over, because they've seen audiences move away from the mainstream media to Megyn Kelly's podcast and things like that.
It's interesting as you talk about this, it really strikes me that if Trump loses, we're going to go back to this conversation and say, wow, like Weigel was talking about how this campaign was captured by very online staffers with esoteric obsessions who pushed those to the front of this multi-billion-dollar ad campaign, which, by the way, has happened at other times in the Democratic Party. But I think right now in the Democratic Party, almost the opposite is happening.
Yeah, the Democrats have had a much more open-air discussion about how, they're worried that they're losing touch with working-class voters because the last generation of Democratic staffers to enter this game are liberals who went to college and don't know anyone who didn't go to college. Basically, I mean, do they have racially diverse friend groups, friends from around the world? They do. Do they know many people who own guns and will never go to college or watch CSI as opposed to watch Succession? Yeah, they don't. And you do find this when you talk to Democrats. So Democrats are, even if they don't talk the language, are much more concerned and say, we need this message to reach people that we maybe do not agree with. And Republicans definitely are saying, well, we agree, we think this, and if everyone hears this, they're going to think it too.
We talked about Donald Trump's ads, and I want to take a moment to talk about Kamala Harris's ads here too, because she famously launched her campaign this summer when she became the Democratic nominee to the cue of Beyonce's Freedom.
We choose freedom.
Freedom, freedom, I can't move. Freedom, cut me loose. Yeah. Freedom, freedom, where are you? 'Cause I need freedom too.
I think since then she spent $1 billion+ on advertising, both through the campaign and through PACs. But in the last few weeks, a lot of that money in swing zip codes is going to ads that don't feature Queen Bey, but feature ordinary voters like Rebecca and Buddy in this Rich as Hell campaign that has taken off. So let's hear a clip from that, and then I want you to explain that shift, David, from freedom to the economy.
20 of you and you're rich as hell. We're going to give you tax cuts. We're going to pay.
I'm not rich as hell. I'm the one that really needs the break, not the people that are already rich and have the money. The 1% don't serve anybody but themselves. So for them to get a tax break, no, that's not cool.
Donald Trump wants to give tax breaks to billionaires, but Kamala Harris has plans to help us. She's going to crack down on price gouging and cut taxes for working people like me. I voted for Donald Trump before, but this time I'm voting for Kamala.
So that's a composite of the Buddy and Rebecca ads of this Rich as Hell campaign. What are they trying to get at there, David?
They're trying to run what has worked for Democrats, what usually works for the party. This is the 2012 Obama campaign against Romney, when the economy was objectively worse than it is right now. It was just early on saying this is a rich guy who's doing favors for other rich guys. One of the new interesting things in the last 2 weeks has been Republicans incorporating Elon Musk into their ads.
Yes.
Because pollsters will tell you, and John Fetterman has said this, Elon Musk is very popular with a lot of young men who hate politics. That's absolutely true. But also you have this very naked quid pro quo going on where Elon is saying, I'm going to work for Donald Trump. And Democrats there's a little bit of the John Lovitz SNL, I can't believe I'm losing to this guy. This is ridiculous compared to what Democrats have faced in the past. Like, if Mitt Romney had been saying, good news, everybody, I just met with a bunch of business owners, I'm going to do exactly what they tell me, it would have been compounding all his problems. What they're trying to say is, look, Donald Trump, who is going to work at a McDonald's for 20 minutes and put on a reflector vest and a garbage truck. It's like, you should not see this as populist Donald Trump swing voter. You should see this as a very wealthy guy lying to you because he's going to cut taxes for rich people.
So these ads are saying Donald Trump isn't Hitler. He's a more entertaining Mitt Romney.
Yes, that don't be fooled by the act.
Yeah. But this move to cast him not as Hitler, but as Uncle Scrooge, or I don't know, is that the right analogy? But that is really interesting. The Freedom ad that we saw blasted all over the place, was that aired on TV in places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Georgia, these swing districts?
Oh yeah, that was in their buy because the campaign was switching over. It's funny, there's still an FEC complaint by the Trump campaign trying to get them to give back all the money that Biden raised, which in FEC fashion will probably be answered in a year, and they'll never hear about it again.
The FEC being the Federal Election Commission.
Yeah, but that they did cycle that in. There was this reboot, but that is not a final persuasion message, because if you are, I should say, this is a little nuanced. If that is your issue, if you want an exciting younger female candidate who's going to protect abortion rights, you are most likely with Kamala. The only caveat I'd say is when I was out with canvassers, I still was finding people who you would think are voting for Harris but are not quite sure how she'll save abortion, or maybe they've heard that in their state it's not going to be overturned. So they still have to do some of that. It's just not they've been really focused, Democrats, on narrowing this Trump economic advantage, and they've actually done a pretty good job of that. And that ad, which is exciting, it doesn't say anything about the economy. And now, so now they have less exciting ads that say a lot more about, and don't worry, your prices are going to go down.
The two ads that you're seeing from the Harris campaign in these swing districts, just to be very clear, is the economy ads, the rich as hell ads, and then the abortion ads, the ads around the traumatic experiences of women who have suffered sexual abuse, had abortions. We can hear one of those ads right now.
I was 5 years old when my stepfather abused me for the first time. I just felt like I was alone on a planet with a monster. I was 12 when he impregnated me. Because Donald Trump overturned Roe v. Wade, girls and women all over the country have lost the right to choose, even for rape or incest. Donald Trump did this. He took away our freedom.
Those are the kinds of ads that are really kind of compelling voters across the country. And what I found really amazing in some of the research for this episode that our producers pulled together was where the ads are being run. So the DNC, for example, had this 7-figure ad buy into nail salons that they were targeting lifestyle magazines, shopping malls, and both the Harris and Trump campaigns are targeting, say, the Steelers and the Eagles matches or games. Sorry, Ben's laughing at my sports, my inability to say match versus game.
I'm watching a lot of sports and seeing a lot of Trump ads right now.
Right? Exactly.
Football matches everywhere.
But tell us where these ads are playing. What are the most contested zip codes and districts right now? And the more specific you can be about where these zip codes are and how much money is being pummeled into them, the better for us.
Oh, yes. So in Philadelphia's media market, Milwaukee's media market, Madison, things have been locked up for a while. You actually, if you wanted to buy a new ad right now, let's say you own a car dealership and you want to go on TV, you can't, because the campaigns bought this stuff. And if you open up a website that takes this advertising, open up YouTube, they're the same thing. But the places they're mostly doing this are these urban media markets that splash out to suburbs. Really just go take the train to Philly, and it is nonstop in these areas because you are trying to reach the person who's watching TV, the person who the young person watching their YouTubes. Their YouTubes. I'm 80 years old, and your old people just like leaving TV on all day. So you do see a lot of the abortion ads from Democrats on morning TV, the idea being that there are more women at home watching this stuff. And you're seeing more of the Trump masculinity, anti-feminist, anti-LGBT agenda ads when you watch sports. That's definitely true.
This week on our branded segment from Think with Google, I spoke with Google's VP of Marketing, Josh Spanier, about how modern marketers are making the most of every channel. Josh, we talked a lot about artificial intelligence, augmented reality, but for all of that, there's still a lot of traditional marketing out there. Things on billboards, on sports uniforms. Does stuff like that still matter? And if so, how do you think about doing both?
So it's said you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I disagree. In the marketing world, we certainly can. What's actually incredibly exciting for us marketers is how the world of marketing is being upended by digital technologies, which is making even so-called traditional media platforms a lot more relevant and engaging.
For example?
Let's take out-of-home media, billboards, the classic sort of broadcast medium, as it were. And let's just start off with the Sphere in Las Vegas. The Sphere, which launched a few years ago, this giant electronic Death Star in the Las Vegas desert, has sort of inspired the whole of the out-of-home industry to be looked at again. You can go to shopping malls and you can see these touch screens now enabled, like massive iPads, where you can actually create interactive shopping experiences inside of a shopping mall. All of these have actually created new spaces for us to do things as marketers, create new canvas using digital technology connected to the web around billboards. It's really fun.
Is everybody going to have a Sphere?
I don't know if we're all going to end up with a Sphere, but there's lots of companies which are building out that technologies. It's also just fun for me seeing how even so-called traditional media like television, right? When I think of television, because of when I grew up, I think of ABC and CBS and 60 Minutes and all that sort of stuff. But actually, the trick is to not think about those networks, but to think about the TV itself, the physical thing in your living room. So, surprising stat of the day, more than 1 billion hours of YouTube content will be watched on the biggest screen in the home. That's a whole new canvas for marketers to actually do really engaging marketing and to reinvent TV from where it has been.
Do you think that's converging? Do you think that somebody who's growing up now knows the difference between watching YouTube on a big screen, what we think of as broadcast on a big screen, whatever else on a big screen?
So it totally is converging, and we definitely see with younger audiences that they're using old technologies in new ways. We always used to rush to find the remote control. Now you can actually control the TV with your voice in the same way you can actually search the web using Google as well with your voice, and also with song, and also with video, and now with AI overviews. And yet it is all coming together where this technology is just a thought away and is empowered by companies like Google to actually make it more useful, more practical. And absolutely, younger people are searching a lot more with their voice and Google Lens than us oldies, even if we're trying to learn these new tricks.
And where can the oldies learn more about it?
If you want to learn about some of these more search technologies, there's actually a great Think with Google article there right now. It just got published last month, and just search AI and search on thinkwithgoogle.com.
All right. We're getting good at this, Josh. And how much, just to talk dollars, right after Harris became the presumptive nominee, Trump was outspending her, I believe, 25-1 or something like that in TV and radio advertising. But since then, Harris has blown the doors off the campaign fundraising. How much of the campaign's now spent, and who's spending more now?
There are two main super PACs that are doing a lot of the lifting for the campaigns. This is Future Forward for Democrats. So far, it has spent about half $500 million on messaging. Then there's Make America Great Again PAC, MAGA PAC, obviously. That spent about half as much for Trump. The America PAC for Trump by Elon has been crucial. I do think if Trump wins the election, will it have mattered that Elon Musk spent more than $120 million on his behalf? Probably more when the election's over, because there are groups being set up that no one reveals the funding of. If the FEC is kind of a joke, and if you set up a PAC after a certain deadline, you don't need to say who's funding it until way after the election. A lot of that is happening right now. But the Harris campaign will outspend the Trump campaign, all told, like 2-1 by the time this is over.
Wow.
They have more money. They have better ad rates. So they've raised more money, more small dollar money. And they got some billionaires helping them out, but really the Republicans it will be a pretty 50-50 split because of all the money coming in from not just Elon, but the Timothy Mellons, the Richard Uline, who's the packaging entrepreneur in Illinois. And I pay attention to the button at the bottom of the ad about who paid for it, but I think a busy, normal person who's not obsessed with covering politics, it's just kind of a blur. You're like, all right, here's the Republican ad.
Yeah, I think it's something like over $1 billion that the Harris campaign has spent between the campaign and PACs, and then Trump would be, I guess, somewhere around half of that.
Yeah, it'll be about that much. It will end up setting a record. That's why I'm kind of being cautious, because there's just going to be a gusher of money that we hear about once the election's over.
So it strikes me as like, what a waste of money, $1.5 billion. But what is the effect of that? Advertisers I know, CMOs I know, are obsessed with the yield of their spend. their CPMs and then what the return is and click-through rates and all of this data. Here, in a world where, Tony Hinchcliffe's joke at a rally becomes the viral moment on social media, Biden wandering and looking confused becomes like a political ad for free on social media that just has like earned organic potential. And just like in this digital world of ad-free Netflix and Hulu, who is watching these ads? Why should we believe they're worth $1.5+ billion? And do they work?
I would say first, the Harris strategy has been pretty successful, and even if a campaign loses, nobody cares. Everything they did was terrible, etc. But what did she do? She reintroduced herself. She stuck to this economic message. She got a lot more popular from approval rating in the 30s to I think the Gallup is ending with her about 49%. And she cut this economic advantage. I think some of that is the real externality of the economy getting better before the election. And some of it is just endlessly running these economics ads.
But some of it also, Dave, is like The Brat. Some of it is Charlie XCX.
Some of
it is
memes,
Oprah.
yeah.
Some of it is, right? It's not the advertising. It's the influencers.
Yeah, the word of mouth with Trump is used very effectively too. Just going, he's done a ton of podcasts where he makes nothing that you would consider news. But people who listen for 3 hours, there's some interesting digressions, but he didn't put out a policy. But he stays in people's minds, and he's softened his image, an image that was 3.5 years ago toxic because he tried to overturn the election. There've been an overall effort to say he's going to bring back low prices and he's a jokey, relatable guy.
Friendly Grandpa Trump. But
yeah.
Just to push on what Nayeema asked, is there anyone saying, because in the commercial marketing world, they're obsessed with performance. Is there anyone in some room saying, hey, is this ad working? Or is everybody sort of flying by their seat of their pants and if it worked if your guy won?
We've talked a lot to Blueprint, this polling operation that's new to this cycle that Democrats rely a lot on. And their data basically matches up, which is that when they're talking about these economic issues, they're improving. If they're distracted by the fascism conversation or something, they're not. So the ad shops, the pollsters, the campaigns all agree that there is a ROI if you're doing that. And on the Republican side, it is a little bit more haphazard. The return on investment people demand when they're political donors is a little weird. They're not saying next quarter prove to me that this increased the market share this much. Like Tim Mellon gave millions of dollars to RFK Jr., gotten effectively nothing for it except introducing some people to from RFK world to Trump world. So there is a lot of money that they just throw in there because donors also want to feel like they're mattering.
This is stuff people get fired for all the time in the private sector.
Yeah, this is like a vanity investment. This is like Broadway and restaurant investing, add to it the political campaign donations. But hearing you answer that makes me think if there's no signal in the noise for voters this many days before an election, there's even less signal for advertisers and donors. But in a world that's very fragmented, in a media world that's very fragmented, what is most influential? Political ads, earned media from legacy outlets, or earned media from social media, organic virality on TikTok and Instagram or YouTube?
I think the last one, and I'm glad you brought up the brat moment for Harris, because some of the commentary on that, especially Republicans, are obsessed with saying, oh, the joy is gone from the campaign. It's really not. This is the first Democrat that Trump has run against who has huge crowds that are excited to see the candidate. I mean, I covered all of them. This is not happening with Hillary. It's not happening with Biden. It has mattered that people feel kind of excited about voting for Kamala Harris. But it really is the earned media, because what's also been happening that we're all aware of, it's collapsing trust in media institutions, and also just what people see on TV. For a lot of people, trustworthy information is not somebody in a studio with a suit who has sources. It is somebody on TikTok pointing at headlines. Even though that we know that those people can be bought off pretty easily, or that they don't know anything.
Actually, that's been a huge thing in this election. I think Max Tani did some reporting on this, the social media influencers that are being hired by these intermediary agencies. And there's no disclosures. There's no required disclosures, which is crazy because social media requires disclosures on advertising, but somehow political advertising has this weird loophole. Like if you put up a Domino's ad, you have to say #ad. But if you put forward, a point of view on abortion that's funded via the Harris campaign through a middleman social media company, you don't have to say anything.
Well, this is, again, a story where Republicans have acted differently than Democrats, because after the 2016 election, social networks like Facebook said, oh, we were letting too much fake stuff get out there. We're going to start regulating this a lot more intensely. We're going to hire people to see whether this is BS or not. And then 2020, that happens. A Republican backlash at multiple levels is saying this is suppressing free speech. Free speech is being suppressed. People have the right to post. Let the internet be free. Let people find their own information. You can't trust the media. And this was supercharged by COVID and this drumbeat of if you trusted the media, you heard that you need to wear a mask and stay 6 feet away. So there has been this years-long battering on the doors of the gatekeepers. Say, these, one, you can't trust them. Two, they shouldn't exist. And so the information environment is much better for candidates and campaigns that want to say stuff that is hooky but might not be true. And that right now is the Trump campaign. There might be some future Democratic campaign that takes advantage of this, but right now it is the Trump campaign saying, for example, inflation's still rising when it isn't, or that gas prices are higher than ever when they're not, or that unemployment is up when it's not.
Or seeding the clouds for the election to be stolen.
Or that's the main one.
That's the main
Yeah.
one. That's the really scary
Yeah.
one, right? And so
Yeah.
a lot of polarization has been tracked down to these social media companies that we've just been speaking about. We've been saying, they're to blame for the level of division in our country, the poor discourse in our country, the lack of facts in our politics. But I always think, what is the long-term hangover of these ads that are creating fear and assaulting the other side? The Trump campaign is basically saying, if Harris wins, this country will become lawless. Your boys will become girls. Your girls will become boys. It's very scary out there. The Harris campaign is basically saying no one will be able to get an abortion. You'll be forced into Handmaid's Tale. And, the level of inequity, you'll never get richer. Your economic prospects will be held back. These are really scary worlds that these ads are putting out there. What is the long-term hangover of them? And can we actually trace some polarization to the advertising world?
I think you can. A lot of it. I was mentioning we just have fewer restrictions on media, and we always will unless somebody rewrites the Constitution. Step away from politics. There are not many countries you can just buy pharmaceutical ads all the time. You watch TV in a non-election season. The ads are not Democrats are coming to change your kid's gender. The ads are, hey, do you have heart murmur? Get this new drug. Do you have restless leg syndrome? Get this new drug. And I think in politics, yes, there is a derangement effect of the search for your people's attention is shaped by a lot of money that in other countries wouldn't exist the same way. So this is already happening on social media where people are siloing off and choosing what information they like. But it has to have an effect that people are seeing endless negativity whenever they're watching TV. I've wondered how this trickles down because one of my little favorite facts is that 40 years ago, I should say, Ronald Reagan was about to win a landslide re-election. And if you look at the economic data at that time, inflation was higher than it is. It was about 3 times higher than it is right now. Unemployment was higher than it is right now. But there was not a drumbeat of we're about to have an economic collapse because there was not as much of this being pushed and paid for. The relentless negativity. And I with Democrats, the version of this that they're talking about, there are states where they found the abortion messaging is limited because voters have an abortion referendum on the ballot, or they live in New York where it's in the Constitution, and they say, I'm being scared by these abortion ads, but I don't really need to worry about it. There are limits to this. I think Republicans are running into some limits too because some of the stuff they're predicting is just not very realistic. Trump was predicting in 2020 that if Biden got elected, there'd be a Great Depression. There wasn't.
But it is true that we like to blame social media, but just this absolute slashing negativity of political television advertising is just it's a deep feature of kind of American life.
Well, it's how people grab attention, just generally. This is just how, if it bleeds, it leads. I felt like this. Maybe I shouldn't use this room as my Eames chair and therapist, but
we'll bill you afterwards.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
But as somebody in the media who spent his career in the media, I sometimes will step back and say, everything today that we covered is this lie effective? And there are days where that's not the story. There are days when, we actually need to cover this bill that's moving through Congress or this earnings report, and these are real factual things we need to uncover and explain. But a lot of the political discourse is really, will people believe this BS that because there's a lot of money behind it? I do think it just has gotten worse in every cycle that I've covered. That clearly is having a deranging effect. I don't know why it wouldn't. I feel like if people are not completely desensitized, like watching multiple times more ads that are telling them to be very angry and scared, that has to have some effect.
Yeah.
So how are you staying, last question, Dave, how are you staying sane in this election season?
Well, luckily, I have been desensitized, and I just can watch endless negative messaging and say, this I see what they're doing here. I see why this works. I see why this doesn't work. So I'm always looking back and saying, is this a thing that matters? Is this a thing that clicks?
Everyone right now is freaking out about the Tony Hinchcliffe's joke about Puerto Rico. Is that such a moment that will hit and stick and be defining for this election?
So yeah, if Trump loses, what would the story? What would the inputs be? One would be, it looks like people underestimated a female vote for Kamala Harris because she's not talking that much about being the first female president. She is talking about abortion. One thing might be, Trump was making tons of gains with Latinos, and then he had this roast comic insult Puerto Ricans. And if you look at the media you're talking about, the earned media, TikTok, group text, WhatsApp, et cetera, that organically broke through. Why the heck did Donald Trump have this guy say a bunch of racist stuff? Trump has actually lost endorsements. She has gained endorsements because of that story. Even as the mainstream media moved on to other stories, this has been organically moving. So yeah, that's an example.
Dave, this is super illuminating. We don't want to keep you in the city of DC. We want to send you back out there into the wild so you can tell us what is actually happening in the country.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks for coming on, Dave.
Of course.
All right. So just endless negativity. That's the world we live in, Ben. Isn't it so joyous?
And billions of dollars spent on it. That end where he just described his job as essentially saying, how is this lie working, is a pretty bleak assessment of the state of American politics.
Do you think that's an overstatement? Like he's just so in the throes of this depressing moment of American politics and elections, or is that really what it is?
No, I think one of the things about paid media is that it's unanswered claims with framed by the person saying them and that's, by the way, that's the last 50 years of American politics, just more and more and more money.
I'm telling you, we got this French system of just closing the window on the elections. That's what we got to get to.
Shut it all down. Yep. I'm ready to close the window.
All right, it's been decided. Let's take a quick break, and when we're back, we're going to talk to Max Tani about something that is another cycle of endless negativity, and that is the media wars playing out in newsrooms and in journalistic circles and Twitter about the Washington Post decision to not endorse.
To some of us, this is a source of joy and endless interest, but sure.
Find it where you can in this election season, Ben. Take a quick break, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back, and we have Max Tani on with us. Hi, Max.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hey, Max. You're on a hell of a tear.
Oh, thank you for saying that. It's really busy, but I guess that always happens the week before the election, feels like.
I love how calm you still sound, despite all that. You sound very chill, Max.
Tired, maybe a little bit, maybe a little worn thin, which is funny because the week before the election is obviously really busy, but it really seems like, if recent history is any guide, it's going to be the week after the election that's going to be more of the challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, in electoral politics, it's a total nonsense week, which is why we had Dave on to talk about the real campaign, which is ads. But media reporters got an actual story, which was the Washington Post, just wandering into this anxious, angry space.
So this is the saga that's been swirling over the past 2 weeks, this decision to not endorse by a number of papers, in particular the Washington Post, where the Ed Board had a Harris endorsement just ready to go until it was quashed by its owner, Jeff Bezos. Max, you've been reporting on the story, so give us the thrust.
Yeah, absolutely. About a week and a half ago, we first reported that the Los Angeles Times would not be endorsing in the 2024 presidential race. And that obviously sparked a lot of internal turmoil and kind of industry-wide chatter, which prompted people to think, what are the other newspapers that haven't endorsed a candidate? And folks noticed the Washington Post also had not endorsed. Turns out the Post had sent its endorsement of Kamala Harris to Jeff Bezos, who was kind of pondering what to do and eventually decided that he didn't want to endorse, setting off this whole chain of subscriber cancellations, this kind of reversal of its democracy dies in darkness slogan, which had kind of helped it during the Trump administration to grow subscriptions pretty tremendously. A lot of those gains were kind of reversed essentially overnight, and staff were frustrated and wondering about what other changes Bezos might make. And, there were kind of some questions about editorial independence. And now here we are.
There is resignations. There are 3 dropouts from the editorial board at the Washington Post. These people have stayed on at the opinion section, but have resigned from the editorial board itself. You talked about subscription cancellations. These are reported as 250,000. And Ben, you've become obsessed with this story. You had a story out that was the Washington Post has been selling democracy. Now it needs a new line of business. I don't know, Ben, if you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just it raises a lot of the big questions about contemporary media. Particularly, a lot of, as the news industry went into all this really economic turmoil, there was an idea that, well, maybe you can sell, not that we have a product that you need and you want every day, but that we're sort of a philanthropy, we're good for the world. In the Washington Post case, we will help stop Donald Trump, and what you're paying for is not a product you read, you're paying almost more like a political contribution. And actually, I think that's been very successful for a number of news outlets. Problem is, if you say you're going to do that, you got to do it. And the Post said it was going to do that, got a bunch of money. And so then those customers were finally, saw this and said, hey, wait a second, you're just a normal newspaper owned by a rich guy who uses the editorial page for his personal quirks and preferences, which, by the way, is the great tradition of newspapers. Sure, but that's not a charity.
I mean, they were also losing money off it, right? Jeff Bezos was losing $77 million on the Washington Post last year. It's not like the line of business was working that well.
No, it's got to be galling to lose that kind of money and have people mad at you.
So actually, 3 days after the Post made this decision, Jeff Bezos came out with his own op-ed defending the move and basically talking about all the reasons why it would help restore trust, ultimately, and credibility in the paper. And I'm actually going to read a quote from it. He says, "While I do not and will not push my personal interest, I will also not allow this paper to stay on autopilot and fade into irrelevance, overtaken by unresearched podcasts and social media barbs. Not without a fight. It's too important. The stakes are too high. Now more than ever, the world needs a credible, trusted, independent voice, and where better for that voice to originate than the capital city of the most important country in the world?"
I think I have a less popular amongst journalists point of view on this, which is I'm not as enraged as I think everybody else in our world is.
I don't think we're enraged. Just fascinated.
Not you guys, but Twitter is enraged. Journalists are enraged. Is that not fair, Max?
I think it's fair among a certain set for sure. I think that there's definitely some folks who are upset internally, but I think they're more concerned about what it means broadly in terms of owners willing to stand up to Trump specifically. But what's your unpopular opinion? I'm curious.
Well, I think the key unanswered question is why Bezos did this. And the kind of simple explanation that's being offered by many of our colleagues in the industry is that Bezos is in Trump's pocket. I think that was literally a headline I saw from a progressive news organization. Another, Marty Barron was on interview. Marty Barron, being the former editor of the Washington Post, was out saying that this is a sign of weakness, that Trump will pounce on Bezos for this. People think that Bezos basically traded the Washington Post endorsement for, keeping in Trump's favor for deals on Blue Origins, his space company, and Amazon Web Services, which of course its government is a huge client for that. I just don't think that's the case. I think Bezos is part of a cadre of Silicon Valley people who are just sick and tired and exhausted by the kind of culture wars conversation, I think it's generational. I think this is him being a boomer and a Gen Xer more than being a billionaire owner. I think he's saying, I want to get the Post out of this activism. I want journalism that looks more objective. I think he's taking a James Bennett approach to journalism as opposed to...
Just a funny time for that conversion to strike him like a bolt of lightning.
Yeah, but I think that this is I don't know Bezos personally, but I've worked at a company where he's been on the board. I know many people that are close to him. And my understanding is that he has been moving in this direction. He is one of the people who took on Trump, right? Trump was at war with him around 2016, in part because of the Washington Post.
Yeah, to real threats to Amazon, by the way. And I think, I guess my view on this is, I don't know Bezos either. I believe you that he is pure of heart and a good person.
I'm
Who
not
knows,
saying
really?
that.
But I just think you see one of the truths of this situation, and of a lot of situations, is that his, I'm sure, purely held and truly held ideology lines up perfectly with his economic interests. That happens a lot in the world. And I don't think it doesn't even make that much sense to say well, is it because of this or because of that? People tend to believe what is useful to believe with very few exceptions.
But the accusation is that he's doing this for political favor with Trump. right?
That's a very crude way to put it, Naima.
But that is the accusation that has been leveled.
Like, he has this annoying money-losing thing that he can't fix that in the meantime really does threaten to screw up his absolute passion project, which is going to space. Really, I mean, this isn't fake. Like, his people were told you have a Washington Post problem.
Yeah, I think actually the more interesting question for Bezos is about Lena Khan and the FTC. I think that's a greater threat to his business, actually, that hangs in the balance of this
Go to
election.
Amazon, for sure.
Yeah, Amazon, of course. And what is going to happen with all of the Justice Department stuff and FTC stuff? Because actually, like, he's not going to out bear hug like Elon Musk's Donald Trump relationship. So SpaceX, one, you could argue is a better company, has achieved much more commercial success and much more success in its space voyages than Blue Origins, not to mention have a better rocket design. And same thing with Larry Ellison on Oracle. Like, Larry Ellison is more cozy with Trump than Bezos is. So if he wanted to do more, if he wanted to ingratiate himself with Donald Trump, he would donate to Donald Trump, or he would do what Ben Horowitz did and donate to both of them.
His employees said, hey, do you want to stick a thumb in Donald Trump's eye next Wednesday? And he said no. And maybe that was for a bunch of well-thought-out reasons that he'd been pondering for a while, or maybe it was more venal, or maybe some combination.
Yeah, but in 2019 or 2018, he stuck a thumb in Donald Trump's eye and also went to proxy war with David Pecker at the National Enquirer, which was really a war about Donald Trump. So
yeah, and paid a real price for it, and like, I think deserves a huge amount of credit.
I don't know, Max, what do you think?
In some ways, I think I agree with you, Nayeema. I think I, in some ways, take Bezos at his word. I believe that he genuinely feels that this was maybe not the best thing for his media property to be doing, and that he wants to kind of reshape the Post in a kind of a different way. I wonder how much of this is also part of the general rightward drift of some of these billionaires and tech folks as well. Maybe it's part of the same trend.
Yeah.
Can I ask, do you guys think that if the Post hadn't been losing subscribers in the years since Trump left office, because basically what happened is they grew their subscribers tremendously during Trump. They were one of the news organizations that benefited the most from the Trump bump, which is, the increased audience attention to Trump during his presidency. And then that sharply fell off as soon as he left office. Do you guys think that if this was still growing and they were still growing subscribers, or they had at least not fallen off nearly as much, do you think that he still would have made this decision?
I don't know. I think it's a really good question. Like, the business is in crisis and has been for a couple of years, and that doesn't help.
I think that he was laying the tracks for a decision like this, and it would have been more intelligent to have made it a year ago, and I think he concedes that in that very well-written op-ed, which, Ben, you congratulated his crisis comms teams for. But I actually think he would have made the same decision.
It's an object lesson in the sort of failure of this generation of billionaire owners, of him, of Patrick Soon-Shiong, of Mark Benioff at time. Like, it's been characterized by kind of drift and inattention, and then occasionally weighing in, but basically I think Bezos was managed very effectively by the people under him who told him for 5 to 10 years that they were transforming the Post into a tech company. Mm-hmm. Totally, forget about that. That didn't happen. And and are sort of managing Jeff Bezos quarter to quarter on what they're telling him the Post is becoming. But that hasn't been met by some concrete product improvements that have made people want the Post. And then he drifts in and does this. Do you think that, like, if you told them, look, if you pull this endorsement, it's going to cost 250,000 subscribers, do you think they would have done it anyway?
I think at some point, like, Jeff Bezos is off in Europe, and this is a drop in a hat for a man who has $200 billion plus, right?
Clearly, it is something that he's concerned about, though, right? I mean, he literally came out as soon as, within days of this being reported and penned an op-ed. Clearly, he is in some sort of crisis containment mode. So even if it's not damaging to him, particularly financially, he's clearly worried about whatever the optics are. He hasn't actually weighed in this way too often in terms of stories about the Post and media crises about the Post. His weigh-ins on it have been fairly rare.
My understanding of Jeff Bezos is like ego, then Amazon, then I don't know, space endeavors.
Where's Lauren Sanchez in there?
And then I think that feeds into his ego, actually. And then the last being the Washington Post. Like, if I had to stack rank his priorities, I mean, but he does chime in with his kind of principles. And what he came in and said in that Will Lewis email was like, the standards of the Washington Post will continue. We'll have a high degree of ethics and standards. And I think that what he's saying in his op-ed is that having a high degree of ethics and standards is not taking a side in the election.
This is just all so micro, though. Like, there's a huge trend here. The sort of billionaire oligarchs who have enormous amounts of power have preemptively tried to avoid the kinds of conflicts with Donald Trump that caused them a lot of trouble last time. You can argue about their motives, but I think the sort of reshaping of America's political life is very clear.
Nothing that he did is out of the ordinary. I mean, like publishers, billionaire owners and publishers of opinion sections weigh in all the time on editorials.
One of my favorite experiences in this vein, I was when I was at the Daily News, I was in the editorial board meeting where Eliot Spitzer came in to running for governor, and Mort Zuckerman, the owner of the paper and publisher, looks out the window at Hudson Yards halfway through the meeting and says, "Would you let me redevelop this?" He was a real estate developer. So, I mean, endorsements are always the sort of corrupt expression of the publisher's will, right? I mean, that's sort of why it used to be why you bought a newspaper. I mean, he obviously has the right to do it.
Yeah.
In the few signals that he has sent publicly about what he wants the Post to do or not do, he's been very clear that he doesn't want it to be losing tens of billions of dollars every year. And this decision cuts very clearly against that.
Yeah,
I think it's going to do
ego.
damage to them for years. Everybody knows it's very, very hard to convert subscribers back once they've canceled. And so I do think that it would, if they knew the extent of the damage, they would have thought twice about this decision.
Yeah. I think that's fair. That does go to ego too. You don't want to make a decision that costs you 10% of your subscription base.
And the assertion, too, that he's corrupt or he's in the pocket of Trump, that really hits at his ego, right? Which is one of the main thrusts of his op-ed was this was not a decision for having to do with Trump at all.
And that's why you buy the Washington Post in the first place, is to be a liberal hero, and it's ending in tears.
But to spin this forward, what is the future of endorsements? Because the New York Times obviously did endorse. The New York Times has a long history of endorsing, too. I think the Washington Post only started endorsing in the 1970s, like 1976. So this is a real backlash moment for them. The New York Times, meanwhile, their first endorsement was, I think, Lincoln. They will continue to endorse. Are endorsements a thing of the past for everyone but the New York Times?
Yeah, I think yes. And Bezos, in fact, and if you read Jeff Bezos' op-ed, you see a very well-argued reason for why, which is on the internet. They sort of taint the brand. People don't really understand that they're different from the newsroom. And I think you basically have the situation which a lot of publishers have arrived at what is sort of an inevitable and correct conclusion at a very particularly opportunistic moment, because that's been true for the last 10 years and will be true for the next 10. They just chose a moment of maximal fear of Donald Trump to make the decision.
Max?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it seems like everything is trending in that direction as newspapers also lose relevance and lose power, with the exception of the New York Times. I think it's very clear that they want to and face serious business challenges. I think they want to hold on to every reader that they have, and they realize that most of the readers who are there who are more liberal leaning and might support their liberal leaning endorsements, they'll stay even if they don't endorse another candidate. So I think that in general, these are a thing of the past.
Podcast endorsements, however.
Is Mixed Signals going to endorse a candidate? Maybe not.
The only candidate we're endorsing is Max Tani as chief chill officer of the 2024 election. We'll see if you can hang on to that next week.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of these phone calls I've had to Ben, I think, would be disqualifying if the public knew about them.
It's been a stressful but productive week.
Exactly. We didn't do a blind spots this week. The blind spot, of course, is whoever will you vote for in the absence of a Washington Post endorsement to tell you who to vote for. That is the blind spot that you, listeners, will have to wrangle for yourself. Everybody, no matter what, get out there and vote. Election day, November 5th. Early voting all over the place. Find out how to vote. Make a plan. Vote.gov. That's the thing.
Thank you for that.
That's it for us this week. Thank you for listening to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media. Our show is produced by Max Tani, Allison Rogers, Sheena Ozaki, Max Toomey, Noah Friedman, and Andrea Lopez Cruzado. This is our last episode with our producer, Allison Rogers. So we wanted to say an extra big thank you. Allie, who has helmed the ship since our very first episode. She's been so critical to building this show with us. She is a hyper-talented, very cool, very plugged-in producer with news metabolism that most would envy.
It's all true. Endorse.
And also a really nice, sweet person. We love Allie.
We love Allie. Special thanks, as always, also to Britta Glanis, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, and Jules Zern. Our engineer is Rick Kwan. Our theme music is by Billy Libby. And our public editor is, of course, Jeff Bezos. Thank you, Jeff, for that check.
I don't think he wants that job either.
If you like Mixed Signals, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And please feel free to review us. We really want to know what you think. So please give us some stars or none if you don't like us, and tell us why.
And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe.
And if you've canceled your Washington Post subscription and your LA Times subscription and you're looking for something to subscribe to that's free, that will cost you nothing, remember to sign up for the Semaphore Media newsletter, which publishes every Sunday evening.